This is a safe place. This is a safe place. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed.
So, acceptance. 1972. Where were you in 1972? How many of you were not alive in 1972? Yeah. I was 10. And glued to the Olympics, it's not like it is today, right? There was, I don't know how many channels we had in Morristown, New Jersey, but 3, yeah. But the Olympics was on, and I was watching the basketball game with my father, and something really odd happened at the end of that game. So the American team, which was not made up of NBA players back then, but amateurs, was down by about 10 points with 10 minutes left, and playing the Soviet Union, which was a much more mature and powerful team. And over those 10 minutes, the Americans struggled to have a 1-point lead with 3 seconds left. In fact, it was a free throw that put them up by 1. International rules in basketball at the time prevented a team from calling a timeout after a free throw. And so the Soviets inbounded the ball, time ran out, and the Americans began to celebrate until the referee stepped onto the court. Ordered them to put 2 seconds back on the clock and have them inbound the ball again. Actually, 3 seconds. After giving them a timeout, the Russian team. And so that happened. The Russian team had 3 seconds, inbounded the ball. One of their best players dribbled in, made a layup, and the Soviets won the game. 12 USA basketball players refused to accept their silver medals. Remember? Boycotted the Olympic ceremony. In fact, haven't accepted them even to today, and 2 of them have provisions in their will that after they die, no family member is to accept. Now, that's an American, right? Acceptance is a hard thing. Now, questionably, accepting that medal would, and see, this is where acceptance gets a little hairy. When I accept something like that, am I buying into the decision that it came from? In other words, that's what they're saying. We don't think it was fair. It was actually against all of the rules, and we don't know what happened, but we're not going to be part of this. And so they backed away and didn't accept their medal. Most days, my choice of accepting and not accepting something is much more simple and clear-cut. Some days it's not. And I want to talk about that this morning. I want to talk about acceptance. And if you remember, we're in the middle of this series about what we believe. Now, not so much spiritual beliefs, although they're a part of it, but what we believe to be true about life. And I want to just kind of back up and review a second to just catch everybody up. So a quick review. Let's define belief. What is a belief? A belief simply defines an idea or a principle which we judge to be true. That's all it is. Gravity. I believe gravity is in place. And although I don't, just sat on my glasses, Bob. Thankfully, my eye doctor is in the building, and I may need an emergency, I don't know what you'd call it. Moronectomy, maybe that's what it would be. A belief system is just what you believe to be true about any particular area of life. And again, gravity is a simple one. It doesn't matter whether you believe in gravity or not, right? You jump off the roof, you're in trouble. And down you'll fall. Beliefs power everything we do, the way that we think, the way that we process information. There are belief systems represented. I don't know if you've been watching any of the debates, but all of them, both Republican and Democratic, while I'm watching them with my wife, I just keep thinking, is this a Saturday Night Live parody? It's remarkable, really. But what we're doing is there's a conflict and a kind of a clash of belief systems. I believe this is the case. I believe this is the case. We believe things about relationships, and those beliefs lead to either a healthy or an unhealthy, or that's where our relationship goes. What do you believe about broccoli? I believe, I believe that Newman had it correct. Remember Newman? Hello, Newman. Remember what he said about broccoli? Jerry handed him a piece on a dare, and Newman looked at it and started to shake, and he said, "Vile weed." That is exactly what I believe to be true about broccoli. Now, that does not serve me well, because broccoli is very good for you, right? And in fact, some of you are just going, "Man, give me that broccoli. I don't understand you." Now, because Oreos weren't good enough, what do you believe about Oreos? Because they weren't good enough, they invented blonde Oreos. Now that is a cookie. What do you believe about cookies and broccoli? It's kind of funny, but I have a package of blonde Oreos at my desk, which every Monday when Susie organizes my office, she hides. I do not have a package of broccoli at my desk. Although, see, what I know is that one is bad for me and one is good for me, and yet I still choose to eat the Oreos. So belief systems and what I believe, then, there's a belief system at the bottom of that. What I believe is that what tastes good is what I want to give myself, and to a degree, I will not eat something that I don't think tastes good, even though I know that it's better for me. That's an interesting thing. Now, a lot of us kind of can live that way until we run into a health condition and the doctor says, "Dude, you keep eating those Oreos," and right? And so then my belief system begins to change because I value my life more than the taste of the Oreo. Although it's a toss-up, right? So what I want to talk about for the next 2 weeks is what we believe to be true about acceptance. Acceptance is a simple idea. It's the capacity to receive with harmony that which is presented to you. Think about a Christmas gift. Think about what's going to happen tomorrow morning that you don't know about yet. Think about what's going to happen this afternoon. Think about what's going to happen when your team this afternoon does not do well or does great. It's the accommodation or reconciliation of oneself to the reality of the present moment. That's acceptance. I recommend it. However, we need to talk about it because for a lot of us, it's a struggle. I want to talk about it in 3 big areas, and we won't cover it all this morning. We need to talk about accepting reality. Reality. Accepting reality is one of the most difficult things for a human being to do. And I'm not sure why, but it's true. This is why it's so important in this wonderful program of AA for an alcoholic to introduce themselves as such. Why? Because what it indicates is they've accepted what's true about reality. And the beginning premise is, unless you understand what's true about yourself, there's no way forward. See? Accepting reality. Now, acceptance doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to just be in that and never change anything. Not at all. In fact, we'll get there. But I want to talk about accepting reality. I want to talk about accepting ourselves. And I want to talk about accepting other people. As I've kind of analyzed how I think and how people that I'm talking with think, those are 3 big areas that need to be unpacked. Now, the opposite of acceptance is rejection. How do you like rejection? It's like the worst feeling, isn't it? So here's what I believe about acceptance. Now, this is changing because I'm changing and growing, but this kind of sums up my belief system. Bob, you're chewing something. Is it a cookie? Is it broccoli? Carrots? Broccoli. Okay. All right. Because I have broccoli up here. This is how my belief system about acceptance and rejection works. One of my least favorite feelings, sensations, experiences is being rejected. One of the things I long for is acceptance. And so through the 53 years of my life, what I have done is learned what I need to do and who I need to be accepted, and what I need to avoid and who I better not be that would prevent rejection, and in a healthy and not healthy way, and it just depends on which group you're in, right? I learned to kind of live in a way to navigate with people's acceptance and kind of in a chameleon-like way. Does that make sense? And so I could become what I needed to be in any given moment or any given situation to be accepted. Problem was, deep inside I knew, you know what, they're not really accepting me, they're accepting this false Joe. And we live a lot of time that way. You find out what a group likes and then you become that. Rejection, at least in most belief systems, is to be avoided at all costs. Acceptance is to be garnered at all costs. It's one of our deepest needs. Becomes clear, this whole idea of rejecting reality, rejecting ourselves, and rejecting others, not living with acceptance, becomes clear in three ways, and this is kind of all setting us up here this morning. So how do you know if you're living a life of acceptance and you're not living a life kind of rejection? Well, if you're living a life, if you're struggling with acceptance, one of the things that's going to be true about you is that you're going to kind of have a tendency to escape or hide. Escape or hide. It's often seen as denial. You deny what's real, what's true. So you may have a check engine light on in your car, and it's there for a reason, and it's telling you what we want you to do, based on our expertise on this particular model, is bring it in and have somebody look at it. And what I think is, all they want is my money, and this whole thing is just coming on because it's that time of year, and then when my engine explodes and the car burns in a fiery crash, I go, oh, maybe that's with the check engine light. So what happens is I get these check engine lights all the time. Because I'm married, a lot of times Lynn, my spouse, can kind of be that check engine light. She'll look at me like, really? And if you're connected in a relationship, you know that look, right? It's like, did you really just say that? Or are you really thinking that way? Or do you really want to do that? And I'll go, okay, something's wrong, isn't it? Yes. Okay, well, can you help me? Because I'm missing it. It's often seen as denial or procrastination or a very limited exposure to other ideas and viewpoints. If you want to hide or escape, you also just hang out with people who think just like you do and kind of build up walls between you and everyone else. Kind of create a personality ghetto, really. So you find, this is what happens in a kind of a harmless way with sports fans. My sons, I have three of them. One of them grew up, in his formative years, was in Minnesota. And so he loves the Vikings and the Timberwolves. And anytime he meets another Vikings fan, there's an instant affinity. It doesn't matter if that other person agrees with Hayden in any other area of life, but they have a connection, an instant acceptance of one another. And so what we do kind of in that way, and that's a fun way, is we go, yeah, come on over. Now, if you're a Vikings fan, you don't want to spend any time with a Green Bay Packers fan. In fact, you question everything about that person. Really? How could you? You just can't get your head around it. And so we hide. It's part of the first story. We read it last week. God comes into the garden. Adam and Eve aren't anywhere to be found. And he calls out, "Where are you?" And Adam replies, "I was afraid because I heard you in the garden and I was naked, and so I hid." This is a life of fear. So one of the ways to help me understand that I'm not dealing with reality, I'm not living in acceptance, is that I hide a lot. In fact, I begin to forget who I really am, and people who are in relationship with me, I think, well, if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't want to hang out with me, and so I'm going to hide and show them this part of me. Okay? That's one indicator. Another one is attempted control. And, when I was coming up in my notes this week, I first had control. And then I went, well, that's not really accurate, is it? Have you ever tried to control things? So you can't really say control, but I can wholeheartedly say another kind of symptom of someone who's not living in acceptance is attempted control. Because that's what most of us do. We make attempts at controlling things. And it always goes really well, right? Everyone agrees with what we think is the way to go, and finally, the world is kind of harmonized, and everyone's like, "Oh, thank you so much, because we had no idea it should be like this." Obviously, that's not the case. This shows up with a deep desire to fix things. Now, just do a little inventory. We want to fix things. Now, I'm a fixer. I love fixing things. But there's a part of that gets a little insidious. Someone that my wife and I know intimately has a bad tooth. An incisor that's just about missing, gone almost. And otherwise, this person just has this deep fear of dentistry, like I do. And it's a rational fear. Dentists, not a rational fear. And so every time we're with this person, my wife is just, "I've got to," and I'm like, "Honey, don't do it, don't do it. Don't do it." You see an issue with someone else and you want to fix it. There's a discontinuity that needs resolution, right? Now, my mother experienced this all of the time with me. My mother always had a Kleenex up her sleeve. Always. And so I would come in from wherever I was, and out would come the Kleenex on the tongue, and that's harmless. But what I want to do is fix things. I want to fix you. I want to fix me. I want to fix the world. That is can be a disguised sense of control. And we have to be careful. So acceptance is a beautiful thing. If I'm not living in acceptance, I can begin to escape or hide. I can begin to attempt control. Now, here's an interesting one. Religion is really good at this. In fact, here are some things. This is the way sometimes people use God. They'll say, "God, I'm really broken, and I need you to fix me." And so God becomes a means to an end. Now, God is not a means to an end. God is an end. And God, by the way, accepts you and the person with the smudge on their face, or the tooth that's really troubled, or whatever it is. Whatever it is I want to fix. One more, and I'm sure there are others. These are the big ones that I've noticed. If you're struggling with acceptance, you're also going to be characterized, at least have a component of a worry and anxiety in your life. And also the sense of kind of complaining isn't such a bad word. Whining, now that one, we become whiners. Worry, anxiety, kind of a constant like nagging complaint. Never really happy with the way things are. It's often seen as obsessing over something or drawing back, and it leads to a need for control. Worry. See, if I worry about something, like this person's tooth, and I can fix it, that's going to take some control, but I'll do that, and then I can stop myself from worrying. That's one way to stop worrying, right? Remove the stimulus. Another way to stop worrying is accept the stimulus and stop worrying. Now, it's very unhelpful for someone to say, just stop worrying. But when I look at what's underneath worry and realize that at least part of it is a lack of acceptance of that thing that I'm worried about and a lack of understanding where my control fits in. See, if I'm in complete control, I have to worry about everything, right? Here's a quick illustration. If I invite 5 or 6 people over for a meal and I'm in charge of the meal, I have to worry about every pot on the stove, right? Right temperature, and when is it going to come off the stove? When are people going to be here? You know, I wonder, Jim is always late, and I'll tell you, if he's late tonight, it's going to ruin this dish, and so I'm constantly, because I'm in control of it all, at least I think I am, I'm wondering, second guessing, should I put this in now? No, maybe I'll wait. And I wonder if anyone's going to really like this. Now, if I'm a guest at the meal, I can just go and sit down and enjoy the meal. Listen, there's a sense where you have some control over your life, but there's also a sense where you're actually a guest in this life. Can you imagine if you began to look at yourself like an honored guest in your own life? You showed up and there was a nice plate there for you. Great table setting. People said, man, glad you're here. What are you drinking? What would you like for dessert? See, it's almost like I go to a friend's house. This is how I think about my life. I go to a friend's house for a meal, and then I take over. You know, this plate setting isn't quite right. This goes on the left. Here's a dirty glass. You want to clean this glass? Can you imagine how long that guy would stay in your house? You know, that's not a bad idea for dessert, but I brought dessert for the group. So why don't you just put your dessert away and let's serve this one. This is a much better choice. This is how we kind of live. We come into the world, a world that is, in some deep sense, prepared for us, and we begin to declare to our host what it is we want and how it should be served and where things should be and how long it should last. And when it doesn't go that way, we struggle. So let's talk about acceptance. Now, I get questions about this, and I have questions about it. Here are a couple that I deal with all the time. When do I accept reality, and when do I fight against reality? I mean, there's some realities I don't want to accept, right? Like, name some. It's okay. Illness, okay? You get a call, the doctor says, you need to come back because we see something on the tests. When do you accept reality? When do you fight against it? Illness. What else? Crime. Okay? Beautiful. When do you accept the fact that we're just living a crime-riddled society and that's just the way it's going to be? Or when do you do something about it? What else? Taxes. Did you say taxes? Okay. That's a good one. Conflict. I mean, good. We could go on and on. Well, here's a way to think about this. Let's use illness. Joe, you have X. Acceptance is, I understand that, doctor. I trust your diagnosis. I understand it, and I'm beginning to understand what it means to me, and how do I treat it? That's acceptance. Rejection is, I don't think I do. I don't want to be a person that has that. I don't want to do the treatment. I don't want to kind of live with it. That's not accepting the diagnosis. What I understand is that when I accept something, it doesn't mean then that I fight against it. When I accept it, it tells me how to fight against it. Does this make sense? So accepting the fact that I just got this diagnosis from my doctor doesn't mean I surrender to it and die. No. It helps me understand how to fight. Not a controlling kind of a way, but in a responsible way. I love myself, and I want to be available to my wife and children and our family for as long as possible, and so I'll fight for my own life. Not denying the disease, but accepting that I have it and then understanding it. You know, the person who has done this best and is the most beautiful example in this room is Ron LeVetri. That man is brilliant. He was given a diagnosis years ago, and I've never seen anyone accept the diagnosis and then learn about it and then just beat the hell out of it. Thank you, Ron LeVetri. So acceptance doesn't mean you lay down. Acceptance means you understand what playing field you're on. Does that make sense? Here's another one. When do I accept shortcomings in myself, and when do I try to change? I love this one. You're late again. Well, that's just who I am. Accept me or or reject me, but, well. Now, that's an innocent one. How do you deal with shortcomings? How do you go, you know what? I don't like this about myself. And I don't want to just kind of give up. And no, that's not the idea. You look at yourself in the mirror, the physical mirror, the spiritual mirror, the mental mirror, the emotional mirror, all of these different components. And you go, okay, I need to spend more time talking about deep things with people that I care deeply about. I need to learn how to kind of get in touch. And now, does that mean I don't accept myself? No, I accept the fact that growing up, I was not taught how to do that. See, this is the big piece. What's the first step? If you want to have a deeper conversation with someone like me, well, I mean, my answer for my spouse when she asks the question, how is your day? A perfectly acceptable answer, fellas, is what? Fine. My day was fine. Now, that's not what she wants to know. She wants to know how my day was. Now, in my mind, I think, well, I've already lived my day. I don't want to go over it again. And then I say, well, how was your day? Well, it all started at 4:45 this morning. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, I'm exaggerating, but what I need to understand is, actually, this is a person who cares about me and wants to help me navigate in my life. Now, I was raised in a family that you just didn't, you don't do that. You may have been raised in a wonderful family where at supper your father said something like, okay, give me the best thing and the worst thing that happened to you today, like in the movies. That was not my family. Now, I love my family, my mother, my father, but they did not have those skills, nor did they pass them on. So, do I reject myself if I don't have them? No. I have to accept who I am, the reality of where I am, to make a step to where I want to be. Does this make sense to you? So acceptance is the beginning of any change. Let me give it to you this way. If you want to get this afternoon to Napa, that's not a bad place to go, right? Wonderful. Especially when you're a kid from New Jersey. Now, I don't mean the auto parts store. I mean the town. you want to get to Napa later today, one of the first things you have to understand is where you're starting from. I just want that to sink in. I want to go to Napa. If you're in Santa Rosa, but you think you're in San Francisco, you will never get to Napa. Does this make sense? And so acceptance says, I want to go to Napa. That's who I want to be. I am in Santa Rosa. A rejection of reality says, I want to get to Napa, but I think I'm in San Francisco, and I can just never get to Napa. I guess I'm just not meant to go to Napa. This is just the story of our lives. I guess I just never going to get to Napa. And the problem isn't that your desire for something more full and complete, like an afternoon in Napa, isn't good. The problem is that we don't know where we are. So if you punched in your GPS, Santa Rosa to Napa, it would take you probably over on 12, I don't know. And if you're in San Francisco, you'll spend the rest of your life looking for 12. It's not there. And so you surmise, I guess I'm never going to get to Napa, and you just check that off. You see? That's why acceptance is so important. What is the difference between acceptance and settling? That's another question. I hate the word settling. Well, I guess that's what we'll settle for. Well, acceptance is the end of settling. Acceptance means this is not the way I want to live anymore, and so I'm going to be brutally honest with the facts of my existence so I don't have to live like this anymore. Settling is, well, I guess that's the end of it. I've tried to change and it hasn't worked, and so this is it. This is not the life that Jesus talks about. Now, let me read you a passage of Scripture. Listen to how Paul talks about this. As God's hand-picked representatives of the new humanity, I love that. That's what you are. You're representatives of the new humanity. Purified and beloved of God Himself, be merciful in action, kindly in heart, humble in mind. Accept life, and be most patient and tolerant with one another. That's accept each other. Always ready to forgive if you have a difference with anyone. Forgive as freely as the Lord has forgiven you. And above everything else, be truly loving, for love is the golden chain of all the virtues. Wow. This is just the most amazingly rich passage on what it means to be accepting. And so to move into this kind of lifestyle, and I have to tell you, if you could describe a life in one paragraph, I'm in on that life. I would love for you to do a thought experiment this week as you have time and want to do something kind of heart work. Take that passage of Scripture that you have in your notes. It's a nice green box. Cut it out, put it in somewhere, your phone case. And when you have a second, get it out and do this little thought experiment. What problem will this prescription not solve? If I was this person, if more people in Nevada, if more people in California, if more people in the U.S., if more people in the world were this person, what problem wouldn't begin to go away? And I suggest you won't find one. Now, to move into this kind of lifestyle, so, you can't just say, okay, so there you go, there's a solution. This is what's happened to me my whole life. People have said, be more merciful, be more kind, be more humble, accept life, be more accepting, be more patient, be more tolerant, be more forgiving, be more loving. There, now just go and do that. And then I think, okay, well, I'm completely overwhelmed. Where do I start? So let me just give you kind of the precursor, the intro to next week. This is the root. The root. To move into this kind of lifestyle, we've got to cultivate the relationship between four 4 belief-shifting concepts that'll shift the way you think. Love, acceptance, understanding, and curiosity. I'm convinced that if we can get the right relationship between these concepts moving in our hearts, we'll grow and change into living the things that are indicated in this passage and others. Here's what I mean. So to love is the goal. Let's think about a tree for a second. To love is the goal. The golden chain of all things. Love. Love is the healthy tree. Now, what does a healthy tree produce? Fruit, right? Whatever. So this came off a healthy apple tree. Fruit, acceptance is the fruit in my life which real love produces. If I'm really loving, really, acceptance will be one of the key and first fruits. And it won't be something you'll have to think about. I have to be more accepting. You will be more accepting. So I can't overemphasize this. I do not have to convince an apple tree to grow apples. All I have to do is give it what it needs to be healthy. You don't have to convince yourself to be more accepting. All you have to do is give yourself the opportunity, the practices, to be loving, and you will grow in your acceptance. To love is the goal. It's the golden chain of all things. Acceptance is the fruit which love produces. Now, understanding is the ground in which love grows. You want to be more loving? Okay. What you have to do is understand. I wish somebody would have told me this when I was 25. I would have said, right? If I want to love my wife, and I do. Now, I love her. Like the first time I saw her, I believe it's like, what? September 1981, sitting in this big auditorium in college, in she walked, and my life was changed. It's so funny. Now, I didn't love her then. I was infatuated with her. You know, if like I was a cartoon, I would be like I'd all of a sudden have a wolf head. My eyes would go, ooga, ooga. Right? But then I got to know her. I got to know her and began to understand her, and then I could love her. Now, I've been trying my best. Well, not always. That's not true. Most days, I try my best to understand this woman, and now for 30 years, I love her so much better today than I did because I understand her. I know, at least to the degree that she's able to share, how she ticks. That's why a relationship can get better if I continue to work on understanding. And so, love for anyone. And by the way, speaking of acceptance, we have the REST program kicking off again next week, right, Susie? Where are you? Next Tuesday. REST, Rotating Emergency Shelter Team. So there'll be 30 to 40 homeless men eating and staying here every Tuesday night. You want to begin to understand homelessness, then come and help and sit down and have a meal with someone who's homeless, and you will leave that room going, I never would have guessed it. Anyway, that's what understanding does. So how do I begin to understand? Well, there's only one way, curiosity. So all I'm going to suggest next week are ways in which you can be curious. Curious. This is my favorite way to begin a sentence now. Used to be this way to my sons. Where were you last night? Now they're almost all out of the house. They no longer have curfews. And so I would begin inquisitions with people that I cared about. Now I begin in curiosity. I'm curious, sweetheart. What are you thinking about Halloween this year? He says, oh, I'm glad you're curious about that, because I'm not thinking anything about it. It's all yours, or whatever. But what an amazing way to begin, actually, to be curious. See, if I care about you, I'm curious. I'm curious. How are you? Something's going on. I'm curious. Curiosity. If you want to kind of understand more about Jesus, just read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, from the perspective of watching for his curiosity. He said this to people a lot. What would you like me to do for you? I'm curious. I'd like to know what you think you need. Curious. If you will become curious, now, you can become curious with yourself. So let me just give you a scenario, and I'm bringing this in for a landing right here. You blow up over something. And later, when you're alone, because that's how you spend a lot of time when you blow up, and you go, you know what, Joe? I'm curious. What was that about? I mean, what happened really? You know what that's called? Awareness. Curiosity helps me to see and hear what's really true about the people that I care about. We really make a mess of things when we press a solution onto a problem that we know nothing about. I can fix things with people like just do this and this and this. You just do this and this and this. Just curious. I'm curious. Are you curious? Curiosity leads to understanding. Understanding is the soil in which love can grow, and acceptance is the fruit of love. Acceptance. I want to talk about some practices next week, because we need to understand what it means to live a life of acceptance. Because I know a lot of us want to get someplace, and we're not quite sure where we're starting from. So let's close in prayer. Band is going to come up. I'm really glad that you're here. God, help us to do careful thinking. This life that you describe is so appealing. And we have thought, sometimes, some of us have thought in the past that all we have to do is say the magic words and you stick all of that stuff into our life like some kind of software download. And we're tired of trying that because it's not true. It's not how this works. And so I pray that you would help us to see what's true about ourselves, not in a critical way, but in a generous way. Help us to begin the process of acceptance. Help us to see what our current reality really is. And help us to deal with it, Father, in a loving and gentle way. With others, help. So that we could become who it is we were born to be. Forgive us for the time that we've settled and not thought about these things. And we pray these things, God, and we make these requests because we know that you are love and that you desire to help us with them. We make these requests in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, friends. Have a great day.
It's okay to not is a safe place. This is a safe place. Don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. There's still hope here. There's still hope.